The fastest way to public safety is through mass deportation. Don't look at immigration issue the way you did 20 years ago. You can't. You have to look at it as to what happened in the last 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration. That means we have had people come into this country. We have no idea their backgrounds. We have no idea who they are. This is the public safety and national security threat that we are under. You can be assured that if you threaten ICE agents, you will be arrested just like you should be. It's a violation of the law.
Well, Jaeson, thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate it. For those of you who don't know, Jaeson is an expert on Mexican cartels, having embedded himself with the Mexican Defense Forces multiple times. He is also a retired captain from the Texas Department of Public Safety's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division and has testified multiple times in front of the United States Congress. Jaeson, welcome to The Brief.
Thanks for having me today. Really good to be with you.
I want to frame the conversation as follows. Recently, you called the Mexican border a disaster of 9/11 proportions. This is before President Trump's reelection. What did you mean by that?
That and the fact that I consider it to be the largest U.S. intelligence failure since 9/11. Absolutely right. And I think that's a direct result of what the cartel's evolution was allowed to become, which caused so much pain to the American people, really and truthfully, on a level never before seen, because there's not a terrorist organization in the world now responsible for killing more Americans than the Mexican cartels and now Latin American cartels that have now been illuminated to us. So that evolution from organized crime into an insurgency, into terrorism, and then into a parallel government was completely missed by the U.S. intelligence agencies. And that's why for 8 years, I worked to designate the Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations.
And I want you to take that same border that you just described in 2023, 2024, and contrast it with the border today. You've embedded yourself with the Mexican Defense Forces. You've worked closely with the Mexican President, Claudia Sheinbaum. What have we seen different under the Trump administration vis-a-vis the southern border and illegal immigration, broadly speaking?
You know, it's stunning. As somebody that has been stationed on your border since 1999 in El Paso, Texas, was an undercover narcotics agent in Brownsville, Texas, 1,290 miles on the other side, and then was a lieutenant in Laredo, Texas, as the war kicked off between the Gulf and the Zetas. We have never seen the border as secure as it is right now. The data validates it, but let's talk granularity for a second. Never mind data. That's one part of it. Let's just talk about what we see on the ground. First off, you have 10,000 National Guard soldiers from Mexico deployed. Now, their National Guard is completely different from ours. Don't try to compare the two. Then you have approximately 10,000 from our side in addition. So that's 20,000 soldiers who are now working what they call mirroring operations. We have never seen that before. And collaborating a level from military to military, protecting each other's sovereignty, but also shutting down those Halcon networks that operate all along that border region. That in and of itself is unprecedented. Then you overlay the new capabilities of U.S. Border Patrol and the efforts from the Trump administration. Look, everyone needs to know that what we are seeing is truly unprecedented. The data validates it, but it's really the granularity of the why. It is the policies coming from the Trump administration overlaid with operations. You know, the policy is right, and that has stopped the immigration issue at an unprecedented level. What is pending, though, that everyone needs to understand what they're doing in these marrying operations is shutting down the infrastructure of the Halcones. Now, the Halcones are scouts, falcons, and lookouts. And every day they're doing what they call marrying operations. It's where the U.S. soldiers, Mexican soldiers deploy together. I am the only U.S. journalist in the nation to embed with the Mexican Special Forces, along with what they call their Secretariat of National Defense Forces, and go up and down that border with them, watching as our soldiers, along with U.S. Border Patrol and their soldiers, work in tandem on both sides of that border to roll up and down the river. It's incredible to see as an old law enforcement officer. The other part of this, and then I'll close, is what you see from those operations is not a lot of arrests. What you see, though, is the illumination of the networks operating so they can go and attack those logistical cells who, for all your viewers, need to understand, they use handheld encrypted radios, they use unencrypted radios, they also use encrypted apps. And that allows them to illuminate those operations through chatter and then shut down those logistics and capabilities that move in the drugs in and out and have had what we call operational control of the border. So it's a layering, bounding effect that has major implications. And I can tell you in a report, it's working.
So part of that practical shift that you're seeing directly has to do with domestic politics, not just with the Trump administration, but in particular, ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement. Can you talk about the extent by which ICE is necessary to bring about those changes you are describing right now? Because I think there's a lot of misinformation or perhaps deliberate disinformation when it comes to ICE's role in tackling illegal immigration and securing the southern border.
Immigration and Customs Enforcement, now led, of course, by DHS Secretary Noem, but with the guidance and the strategy through Tom Holman, who is a close friend of mine and someone that I was with Border 911 with, speaking across the country. The strategy has been right. The policy has been right. And look, here's the deal. The leveraging of Immigration and Customs Enforcement to enforce the laws of those who are here illegally and to get them out of the country, that seems like a no-brainer. But you have to understand what that means. It is spreading across the world. The perception, and perception drives migration. Don't let anyone lie to you. And I've said this 1,000 times. It shuts them down that if they come here, they will be picked up and they will be deported. Why spend all that money to try to get here, to put yourself in harm's way with all of these dark networks like the cartels and many others, right? Make that long journey, risk your life just to get here, to be arrested, to be deported. And that layering effect of the great work of the Mexican National Defense Forces, working with U.S. Forces, overlay that with CBP, overlay that with ICE, that effect, that multi-layered layering effect has huge consequences. And you see it in the data and the protection of the southwest border right now.
So let me push back and play devil's advocate just for a moment. Why should the average American, in your opinion, care about illegal immigrants who are not convicted felons, who they don't view as dangerous or a threat? Why is this an important issue in your eyes?
And I think it's a great question. The fastest way, and I want to be very clear on this, the fastest way to public safety is through mass deportation. Now, here's the why. Don't look at immigration issue the way you did 20 years ago. You can't. You have to look at it as to what happened in the last 4 years under the Biden-Harris administration. They allowed millions of people, not just from Mexico. This is not a U.S.-Mexico problem. They allowed millions of people from around the world, from over 100 different countries to come into, approximately over 170, to be quite frank, according to the data from CBP. What does that mean? That means we have had people come into this country. We have no idea their backgrounds. We have no idea who they are. We have no idea what. Look, this is the public safety and national security threat that we are under. In the old days, I would agree with you. Even I would say, leave those people alone. Just go after those who have a criminal record. We can't wait for that now. We can't wait for a building to fall down. We can't wait for churches to be stormed by gunmen who come from the Middle East because we don't know their background and we have cells of terrorists. We can't wait for that. The federal government only has so many agencies. The model with which we are using right now is Model A, or Phase 1. If they do not implement 287G program, that program allows state and local law enforcement across this country to start picking people up. Because you got to remember, every day, law enforcement officers are conducting traffic stops. They're responding to family violence calls. They will be the ones that will pick out these individuals who will be the key players in some of these networks that we have no idea about. No idea about. And for me, that is the point. Now, you can put guardrails on that to say exactly what you said. Listen, you stop at a mom with a couple children, they're here in the country illegally, let them go down the road. Everyone needs to know that is happening anyway right now, every day. Okay, wow. Every day, local and state law enforcement officers doing their normal duties are letting those people go down the road because they don't enforce immigration law. And they can continue that, but they have to have the ability to check the systems when they do come across people so that if they are those terrorists, if they are linked to these groups, they have better connectivity amongst the data systems. And I can go on. Look, what I'm trying to articulate here for the viewer, what has not been told to them from the Homeland Security enterprise is the threats that we have that walk among us. We're in a new world after the Biden-Harris administration. The problem, though, is we've done a horrible job of communicating that. And it's this outdated model, even under the Trump administration. While I give them a lot of credit, they fall into the same old thing. We can't talk about this. We can't show that. So what do? We stand on the pulpit. We put a camera on some individual, whether that be the president, whether that be Tom Holman, whether that be the Homeland Security Secretary, and they tell us about these problems. But the American people, left, right, up, and down, we have been lied to so much that if we don't show it, people don't feel it and believe it. That's why I got into journalism. But we're in a new world, and the American people must know it.
I mean, I would add tangentially, when I was on the far left of the political spectrum, when people such as yourself would talk about illegal immigrants are coming from the Middle East or coming from China, I would basically laugh that off as a conspiracy. No, it's exclusively from Central America and South America. And we're saying that that's not actually the case. On a similar line, though, when we talk about these ICE raids, a lot of it is not just because of their status as an illegal immigrant, but we're also seeing that they are repeat offenders for certain crimes. So can you talk about what percent or approximately how many of these ICE raids are also in conjunction with ATF, with the DEA, with the FBI?
All of them. And that's the importance of why 287G is so important. Look, the other part of this is the problem set is so much bigger than it's being articulated. And every one of these federal agencies know it. That's why all of them are involved. But that's why the model in phase one works. Has a lot of issues. Wearing the balaclava mask, we can discuss all that. But at the core, at the end of the day, the model is going to have to evolve much bigger, more rapidly, because even with the hiring of 10,000 ICE agents, it's not going to be enough.
So I'm very proud to be working for PragerU. I'm not as proud to be living in the state of California. And in particular, it's because our Governor Gavin Newsom recently signed a mask ban for all ICE officers. They are now prohibited from covering their faces. Now, leaving aside the constitutional questions, which I think this will be struck down, I don't see how it's constitutional in any way. I guess, would this mask ban be necessary if there were not coordinated attacks against ICE and federal law enforcement officers? Can you talk about some of this coordinated attacks that we're seeing from homegrown Antifa activists, far-left radicals, who anytime they see federal law enforcement actually enforcing the law, there are violent responses?
Look, I'm a firm believer in the United States. We don't wear masks. However, why do I support it now? And I go back to the environment. If you have a state like California, and that state does not enforce the rule of law when ICE or any federal law enforcement, state law enforcement officer, or local law enforcement officer are threatened, if they're being, doxxed like we're seeing happen all over, or they're being targeted, then you have no other choice. So that is a secondary impact from, once again, not enforcing the rule of law. And it's why I would say too, like if you come to Texas, where we do enforce the rule a lot, not everywhere, but in most states, there's no reason to wear a balaclava mask where I am right now in South Texas, because in this county and in this area, you can be assured that if you threaten ICE agents, you will be arrested just like you should be. It's a violation of the law. So, but the problem here is that's not being discussed and talked about, because believe me, those agents don't want to wear those masks in 100+ degree weather either. You see what I'm saying? But there's consequences when the rule of law is not enforced. I'll give you a great example, Portland, Oregon. How can you have riots in front of a federal building for 3 months? Somebody explain that to me. That makes no sense, because that means you have no enforcement of the rule of law, because the U.S. prosecutors are not doing their job. So the secondary and third impacts are the balaclava mask. And every American watching needs to understand that. I'm with you as a long-term law enforcement officer, and I can promise you, Tom Holman is with you. But until we can get prosecution to protect these people who are doing the will of the president and of their leadership, then they've got to wear these masks. And I fully support it in those areas.
I would also have to add that I find the hypocrisy of Governor Gavin Newsom not having a problem with these pro-Hamas agitators on California college campuses, UCLA being most prominent, violating the law and then wearing their masks, and he seemed to be okay with that. But I digress. You mentioned Portland, and I'm glad you did. Donald Trump is sending the National Guard into Portland. His critics are, of course, characterizing this as authoritarian, as unconstitutional, as a power grab. How would you respond to those critics?
It's a lack of rule of law. And any reasonable American citizen who watches for 3 months the ICE facility being attacked night after night, day after day, and no prosecutions taking place, what I can't understand is how Pam Bondi is not sending strike teams of U.S. attorneys in there and arresting them all for rioting. This should never have been allowed for 3 months. And so look, at the end of the day, what I would just say to everyone, even if you're on the far left and you're watching, you totally disagree with everything, you have to ask yourself this: how can the rule of law not be enforced and then not understand how the secondary and third impacts hit us? Why is National Guard going there? Because the rule of law is not being enforced. Are these things happening? Why are balaclava masks being worn? Because the rule of law is not being enforced. And it goes back to not just arrests. Look, that's just one piece of it. If you're not charging these people, yeah, being arrested and coming right back out, that's like nothing's happening. There's no consequences for actions. These are the secondary and third impacts. Look, I've seen it all over. I was in the riots in California when the National Guard poured in, and it's stunning. I arrive on day one with rocks being thrown down on police officers down below. I get there and 10 people had been arrested. 10. Well, no wonder they just keep coming back for more and more and more. In the old days, we never allowed that. Never allowed that. And once you start to see enforcement operations take place along with U.S. attorneys filing charges and holding people in jail, you won't see these rioters keep coming. It's pretty simple.
I think relatedly, you were one of the first to call for the federal government to designate the cartels as a terrorist organization. And we've seen that strategy work quite effectively, I would add. Trump is trying to do the same thing with Antifa. What tools does this administration have to get rid or otherwise respond to the threats we're seeing against ICE officers and in particular from Antifa and other far left groups?
The terrorism designation was always about two things. One is focus. Second is authorities. It's never been about war because you're never going to win a war based on that anyway. This is about allowing a new capability to take over to go after the cartels who had evolved into a parallel government. And it is fundamentally, absolutely devastating them right now. And I could go on and on about that, but let me go directly to Antifa. Now, in domestic operations, what this is allowing is focus. It would stun your audience. Even though we are led by, leaders who work directly for President Trump, these federal entities all are basically operating and doing what they're doing. So by him designating Antifa as a terrorist organization, what that has done domestically immediately is caused a focus by requirement that if you don't start the intelligence collection and enforcement operations against these agencies, I can fire you. That right there is a massive shift. Now, I'm going to go into some other things about what a failure that is, that he should never be required to do that at the president level. That should never stop at the top. It always comes from the bottom up. And what that shows you is the level of failure at the federal level of law enforcement and at the U.S. intelligence agencies level. Now, second, remember, Antifa doesn't operate only domestically. They operate globally. What you can do domestically, authority-wise, nothing changes. I want to be very clear on that. They can tell you it does, it doesn't. Sure, it can provide more funding and all of those things. But authorities, under the Fourth Amendment domestically, we all will always in the history of this country domestically operate under the Fourth Amendment rule, which is the investigative model. And we as Americans want it that way. However, when you are fighting outside the confinement of our country and outside the confinement of Fourth Amendment, you have the full tools of national power. Now, what is yet to determine is what President Trump is going to authorize, if any, to go after Antifa globally. And that's where his big win will be, because going after them globally and then conducting the investigative model domestically, providing the focus, those two together are where the win is. What we don't yet know, though, is what is going to happen on global operations, if any at all. But domestically, a lot of accountability now comes into play, and it is a big win. And I will tell you, as somebody that did this for the state of Texas under the Department of Public Safety when we began tiering our gangs, President Trump has also indicated there may be more coming. That is a good thing, because a great example of this is the Hells Angels. Getting all of these federal agencies to focus on requirements is a big win for the folks watching. So that's what I would say about that. But I truly am frustrated. And I mean this, I'm frustrated that this has to come from him at the top. The system is designed differently. This is why you have the leadership in these agencies to bring this and say, sir, this is our threat assessments. This is what we need to be doing. We should never have gone decades, president after president after president, and nothing being done against Antifa and many other U.S.-based street gangs and other that work with transnational groups along with terrorist organizations around the world. And so it's a system failure as well. And I could go into a lot of depth about the data collection with NIBRS that's requiring or causing a lot of these things. But what the American people need to know is we still have a lot of challenges fixing the federal system, the data collection system, so that this goes from the bottom to the top. It doesn't matter who's in charge. It shouldn't matter if it's left or right. The system itself is sick, and that's why it's not working properly.
So before I let you go, let me ask you one last question. Is it possible to go after the network of NGOs and the financial backers of Antifa and its members? And what would you say those charges would actually be and look like?
Well, when you talk about financial investigations, first I'd come the people who are the best of the best at that is the Department of Treasury. And those focuses domestically have now been unlocked. The challenge you have there is you got to have people to be able to prove that financially that the money is dirty, that it was involved in this, which means you're going to have to do a lot of indictments, get a lot of people to roll, flip, or go up on Title IIIs. And Title III investigations, by the rule of law, a lot of people are not aware of this, is required that you've got to exhaust all means before you can go to a Title III. And so what that means is it takes a lot of time for that. And so I think we're going to see the destruction of Antifa and those networks take place. I think you're going to see a lot of the money, operations, and investigations flow into this, and we'll be able to see where that's coming from. But for everyone watching, this isn't hard to figure out. We know where the money's been coming. I mean, we've known it. I mean, a lot of the NGOs have been funded by our own federal government, who have been, the money's coming. I mean, I'm not telling you anything anyone doesn't know here. The problem is now is proving it in a rule of law in court and arresting those people who are responsible. But also, in very fairness here, having the leadership of the secretaries, especially in DOJ, and the failed lawyers of the United States Department of Justice who have failed us all for so long, holding them accountable, firing those individuals who refuse to do what needs to be done, and using a level of force the likes of which we've not seen, not force, but focus to go after them. That's been a real problem. And the fact that you had to have the President of the United States do this shows you how sick our system at the federal level has truly become for a very long time.
Unfortunately, Jason, I think you're absolutely right, and I think there have been many in the deep state, certainly within the DOJ, who are part of that failure. I really want to thank you for your time and your insight and everything you've been doing on this issue. We really appreciate it, Jason.
It's great to be with you, and I just want to close with this to the mothers and fathers. We got the terrorism designation. We promised you we would do it, and God bless you. You are not forgotten.